Welcome, everyone. You are listening to the Votes and Seats podcast of the Center for Political Science of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium. My name is Szabolcs Janik, researcher of the center. In today's episode, we will discuss the most recent Swedish legislative election held on the 11th of September. And I have the honor to welcome Mr. Kjetil Duvold, associate professor in political science at Dalarna University, who will share his thoughts on different aspects of the Riksdag election, with special attention paid to the results and the political consequences. Mr. Duvold, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm quite sure that most of our listeners have already heard about the most recent Swedish election and have some information actually on the results. And my first question would be, did you find anything interesting about the results of the election?
Well, it's become the new normality that Swedish elections will create quite a lot of turmoil, and that has been the case this is the third election that has created a rather unstable outcome. 2014 and 2018 and now again 2022. It started already in 2010 when the Sweden Democrats first entered, but I would say at that time they were rather small at that time, and there was an agreement between the liberal conservative government and the Greens to a pact that somehow kept the Sweden Democrats out of power, so to speak. Afterwards, it's been far more difficult to compose governments, and so that's nothing new in that sense. But what is interesting about this election, or one of the interesting things at least, that is that there will be a government change. But the outgoing main party, the Social Democrats, did actually perform rather well, and a substantial increase from the previous election. That is itself is kind of useful, but it's also useful that they are the loser at the same time as they were one of the winners. Whereas the likely next prime minister will come from a party that actually lost quite heavily. So they are sort of the loser. The other main winner, apart from the Social Democrats, is obviously the Sweden Democrats, which did a good election and became the second largest, psychologically speaking, a major blow to the Conservatives of no longer being the next biggest party and being the third biggest party and being overtaken. I mean, they have had this position of being the second largest party for decades. So that's something very new. Yeah, that's the main sort of some of the main interesting parts of the latest election.
You touched upon who can be considered losers and winners, and if you broaden this picture, then we can add the smaller parties. Some of them also lost many seats compared to the last elections held in 2018. So they also added in this regard to this final result that Sweden is seemingly having a right-wing government, a center-right government with some kind of support from the Sweden Democrats. So what was the problem for these smaller parties? They couldn't attract as many voters as they could in the past.
Well, you're right. All other parties more or less lost. Well, actually, the Greens had a small increase actually, but both the Greens and the Liberals were on the verge of not being ending up underneath the threshold of 4%. But they were not in the end, and partly because of tactical support from from potential supporters of, say, the Social Democrats for the Greens, and the Liberals, probably with quite a bit of support from the Conservatives, for instance. But what did they? They failed to some extent to be heard, to get their message through, which is surprising that in the land of Greta Thunberg that the Greens are struggling so much. They have a structure with two party leaders, and I think they have a little bit of problem of being heard, or being attracting in the same way, not having a clear face, since it's two party leaders. The Liberals have problems in the sense that they have tied themselves to a right-wing coalition, and many Liberals are very unhappy about the prospect of the party making an agreement with the Sweden Democrats. So it's troubling many Liberals who probably to some extent departed or voted for the Center Party. But then again, the Center Party also had a bad election, and the party leader has now signaled that she's on the way out. This is a party that traditionally has tried to attract the countryside rural voters, and they have become quite strong in urban areas, but weak in the countryside. And where, interestingly, the Sweden Democrats had a breakthrough this time, and attracting many potential center voters. So it's been a bit of shift of voters from one party to another. Some have lost. The Social Democrats won quite a lot, but they also lost voters. They lost particularly immigrant voters due to some statement by the Prime Minister of Somali town that she didn't want Somali towns, and there was a new immigrant-only party called Nuance that appeared, but they didn't have a breakthrough, but they stole quite a lot of votes in certain districts. So some shifts. I don't know the details of exactly how these shifts are, but they're quite substantial. Another party that was disappointed with this performance was the Left Party. They have a leader which was quite popular, but she failed to, and she has sort of moved the party a little bit in a bit sort of leftist populist direction, but it also failed, must be said, largely.
Yes, and if we talk about the campaign itself, the election campaign, what were the key issues? Could you tell us a few words? Because if you look at the news from the, let's say, 6 months preceding the election day, we could observe immigration, crime, the economy. So these are very classical political topics and issues that can come up in election campaigns. Were there any others, and which could be the most decisive for the voters?
Clearly, the two top issues were the top issue, and I guess that was inevitable for quite a while, was the issue of crime, crime and order, and in particular in relation to the increase in gang related violence and murders that have taken place. That is seen by many voters as something that Social Democrats have not managed to resolve or to deal with properly. So that is a typical right-wing issue, and something that both the conservatives, the moderates, and the Sweden Democrats were expected to gain from a focus on that. In the case of particularly the Sweden Democrats, of course, there is an underlying issue of immigration debates. It's not a necessary condition for that debate, but it's clearly that many of these gang-related incidents have been related to areas with high levels of immigration. So that issue has been sort of been clear for a long time that would be on the forefront. The other issue that became dominant was, perhaps not surprisingly, given the prominence of the issue for the last few months, has been energy. So that was the other issue that the right-wing parties could benefit from, that the government hadn't been able to not been able to deal with this properly. And then, of course, the outgoing government, was saying that, well, this is an issue that affects all of Europe. It's not a Sweden-related only problem at all, and this is related not least to the war in Ukraine, and directly to the sanctions against Russia, and then Russian sanctions against Europe. So that was a government position, and I think many would agree that is largely is true. But at the same time, the government or the opposition was thought that the government didn't have really a strategy. They were against nuclear energy, and so that issue of building new nuclear plants became an important one. Never mind that, of course, it's going to take years and years before these nuclear reactors are ready. But still, that was the other major issue. Foreign policy questions were largely absent. European issues largely absent. Even the war in Ukraine, Sweden has is just on the brink of becoming a member of NATO. That was not an issue, partly because there's a broad agreement over it, so it was not an issue. Not the sanctions, not Russia. So I would say it was a fairly domestic political debate.
And did any political power try to make use of Sweden's potential NATO membership, or did it come up in any way in the campaign, or is there a consensus among the Swedish parties with regard to the country's application for NATO membership?
There's a large consensus on it, but of course it didn't used to be the case. There are two parties that have changed position on this. Sweden, the Social Democrats, first of all, and most importantly, have been pro neutrality, but very quickly changed position back in April, and also the Sweden Democrats favored membership and didn't used to. All the traditional conservative parties have been in favor of NATO membership for a long time. Still, the Left Party and the Greens are against NATO membership, but their voices became rather marginal in this. There was a discussion, particularly on how far should we go in dealing with Turkey and with Erdogan, who of course started to threaten Sweden and threatened to veto it. That's an issue related also to the Kurdish diaspora in Sweden. That suddenly Turkey started to demand, at least publicly, the release of certain people, particularly Kurdish persons that the Turkish officials wanted to be hand over to Turkey. This is not something that would be politically acceptable in Sweden at all, and it created a lot of tensions and stirred up a lot of emotions among Kurds in Sweden.
Maybe we should somehow inform our listeners that how actually the coalition talks currently stand, because I'm quite sure many of our listeners know that forming a government is a lengthy and complex process in Sweden. In particular, given the fact that many parties and many party leaders have to negotiate in order to reach an agreement. So how does this look like after this election, and what are the possible milestones, and when can Sweden have a new government? Where do we stand now?
Well, last time around it took very long time. It took several months. It's not going to be that long this time, most likely. We may expect to see a government already. I mean, rather shortly. Some mistakes have been learned from last time around. The center parties, at least, have been, or let's call them the center parties. That I'm talking about, the center party and the liberals, have landed in their position. They had an agreement with the Social Democrats last time around, and that was that ended, and the liberals also shifted and became supporters of a conservative government. So now the positions are more stable. But of course, the big elephant in the room is the Sweden Democrats. It's the largest party in opposition. Or in the upcoming government, but they are not likely to be offered a seat, it's too delicate to offer positions, ministerial positions to the Sweden Democrats. It's been talked about, and they have said that they wanted it, but it's not likely to happen, because the government is not likely to happen if Sweden Democrats insist on it. It would probably be acceptable to the moderates. It will probably, for sure, be acceptable to the Christian Democrats, but not to the liberals. And they need the liberals on board. Although the liberals are much smaller, it would not be. It's probably not. It's not a strategy that Sweden Democrats will opt for. They opt for, instead of getting key persons in committees, and so to be more of a running it more in silence. There is a parallel here. That is what happened in Denmark in 2015, if I remember correctly, when the Danish People's Party, they were not part in the government. For various reasons, but they actually lost as a result of this, and now is a rather marginal party. So this is a big fear of the Sweden Democrats, is that they are not that they will be marginalized, and of course they can be marginalized in two ways. They can be given power. And being exposed, so to speak, and maybe not being as competent as they claim to be. They can also stay out of government and then be seen as cowards of not taking responsibility for the situation. So it's a little bit. It can go either way, really. So they have to play their card carefully, well, and they're looking carefully at the situation. What happened with the Danish People's Party some years ago.
And could the Sweden Democrats be satisfied with a scenario in which they are not officially part of the new cabinet, but rather provide external support for a three-party minority coalition, actually. But as far as I could understand you, they in this scenario they would not get any ministerial seats in the new government. But what could they get, and could they be satisfied in such an arrangement?
It's true that it's given that they are the largest party, it would seem a little bit like underachievers if they're not actually in the government and not. It's sort of on paper they probably will not get the power in which corresponds with their electoral strength. Now, exactly what kind of power they will get, and if they will choose certain areas that other parties are happy to leave out, it remains to be seen. There are certain areas where the Sweden Democrats is actually interested in power, but the other parties may not be. Culture is one. Sweden Democrats is, unlike most of the parties in Sweden, in fact, are actually interested in culture, and that is because they want to reshape the culture sector and to make it much more national, to shift the focus away from, call it, free art and to manage it much more. And that could be happen as a sort of as a bargaining between the parties. And then of course there is agreement on many of the issues related to crime, order, immigration, but Sweden Democrats have certain positions on immigration and to that concerns, say, family members or somebody who's convicted and of being expelled. That would not be acceptable to the other parties, not even the moderates, I believe. So it's a party that is, they have received quite substantial electoral strength, but they may have a problem of getting their agenda through because it's seen as too radical. Don't forget that also that although Sweden Democrats is now the next largest party in Sweden, it still is the least liked party in Sweden. It's if you rank the party that of what people like the least or dislike most, if you wish, then Sweden Democrats is easily the most unpopular party, as well as being the next most popular, of course.
And given this political situation that emerged as a result of the elections, how can this all affect the stability of the new government? What are the biggest risks? Of course, we can implicitly derive from what you just said, but what could be the bigger threat to this new government that is expected to stand up in the upcoming weeks?
Well, the voting now for there was a round of voting for the presidency or the parliament or it's not called presidency, the speaker of the parliament. There was a sort of a bad sign there that there were actually some. This was a secret ballot, so we don't know who actually did it. But somebody in the new upcoming the center right government voted against a Sweden Democrat as a third speaker of the parliament. And that came as a bit of a surprise, a bit of a shock to some. This person was voted through anyway in a later ballot, but still it gave a signal that there can be a problem here, and indeed it may well be problematic. That first of all, the Liberals are. If the Sweden Democrats get too much of their policy through, it may easily go outside the comfort zone for the Liberals, and there can be certain parliamentarians or certain members of the Liberals who basically decide to leave the party, to change side. Meanwhile, we should keep in mind that the Sweden Democrats have many loose cannons within its ranks. Many members of parliament, based on previous record, that have been unreliable, and there can be some problem with so-called lone wolves in the parliaments. It's in such a sharp, razor-thin majority. So it's many things can happen. Many things happened during the last Social Democrat-led government, which used to be Social Democrat and the Greens together. It's very likely that there will be similar hiccups in the next upcoming period, I would imagine.
And what could be the key policy program points of the new cabinet? Because in recent decades, and not only in Sweden, we could see some convergence in terms of the key policy objectives of mainstream left-wing and right-wing parties or political powers, because they, for example, in Sweden, they didn't change significant part of the welfare system, be it a right-wing government. So there was some kind of consensus in key policy points between center-right and center-left governments. So what could this new right-wing cabinet do differently compared to the previous Social Democrat-led government? And in particular, with regard to the fact that they will have the Sweden Democrats on board as well, either in the coalition or as an external supporter in the Riksdag?
Well, there are key reforms that the conservative liberal parties, the moderates, the Christian Democrats, the liberals, and as well as the Centre Party, which is not part of this alliance, would like to see. For instance, a reform of the labor market policies, but in this case, the Sweden Democrats is actually a much more left-leaning party on many social issues, and they have both on unemployment questions of employment policy, but also on pensions. They are likely to not support any sort of radical or call it liberal reforms. So in other respects, then it's possible to imagine that the Sweden Democrats are willing to set aside some of their disagreement with the other parties if they get their priorities through. And this is a party that is, I wouldn't say it's a one-issue party, but it's a party where the question of immigration and let's call it nationalism are sort of at the forefront, and I think they are likely to. They can negotiate on other issues if they get their way on their sort of core issues, their favorite issues.
Thank you. And my final question would sound as follows. You already mentioned that the Sweden Democrats are becoming a part of the active political life these days, because they were released from a kind of cordon sanitaire erected by all the other mainstream Swedish parties, and what kind of processes can this trigger in the whole Swedish party system, and more specifically on the center right?
Yeah, it's a complex question. You're right that there was a sort of a cordon sanitaire against the Sweden Democrats for a long time, and all the way until the last election. And then there were some slow steps taken first by the Christian Democrats and then by the moderates to start to talk with the Sweden Democrats. It wasn't just like they were shunned, but it wouldn't. They were still strong, so it's something. I guess it was a realization among parties, conservative parties, that we need to deal with it somehow. And there was this idea that or at least that's what was said explicitly. We have a lot in common with these parties. We can agree on core issues, while we can sort of overlook some of the issues that we disagree over. So there is currently a sort of a divide in Swedish political landscape of many on the conservative commentators, but not all, and liberals, who think that somehow Sweden Democrat is a party among other parties. We have to deal with them like any other party. We can agree on some issues, but disagree on other issues. But ultimately, we have to treat them as a respectable partner. While many on the left and also some liberals disagree and say that this is not just any party. They have it's a far more radical agenda that is potentially could change politics in Sweden to a much more profound way than any other parties. They want something. They want to. One of their slogans was indeed change, real change. So there is this sense that they have, or a sense of discomfort among many that when the party leader just days before the invasion of Ukraine was saying that he didn't want to choose between Putin and Biden, and he has previously also said he doesn't want to choose. Well, he prefer Orban to Macron. So there is a sense on the left, but also in the center. And among many liberal conservatives, that this is something else, and this is not just issue difference, but it's a whole understanding of democracy and what it entails, that makes many people feel uncomfortable about giving this party power. That they want something else. They want to reshape the whole democratic playground or playfield in Sweden. Yeah, that's what I.
So, thank you very much, Professor Duvold, for joining us today and sharing your extremely interesting thoughts about the Swedish legislative election. The listeners, thank you for following our Vote and Seat podcast, and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.